Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, or it could be evening for my friend Ali over in Lebanon right now. But we're just delighted and honored that you'd spend your time with us. And those of you who have heard Tom Rogerson, I know exactly why you signed up to be with us, because you want to hear Tom again. Those who have not heard Tom Rogerson, you will say, oh my gosh, how did I not hear about this guy before? And then we've got also deep bench strength with Andy Ward, who's there in case Tom and I mess up. Andy Ward in Atlanta can pick up the ball and run for both of us. So anyway, we're delighted to have you with us. So I've got the next 19 minutes, and then I'm going to turn it over to Tom. So I hope you don't get too tired of looking at my face. But here's the question. What do you think of when you hear the word wealth? What comes to mind? I mean, maybe you think of some of the people that are extraordinarily wealthy. I know I do. I think, wow, those are some big numbers. And some people, they kind of like to fantasize what it's like to be in those shoes of some of those really uber wealthy people. Or maybe you'll hear some expressions like this. He who dies with the most toys wins. I'm not so attracted to that one because there's still somebody's dying, whether they got toys or not. This one is interesting. If I only had a little bit more, and I've had this come up in a number of meetings, and I'll ask them, well, so what's a little bit more? And well, just a little bit more than what I have right now. Then I would be happy. Okay, and then this one is one of my all-time favorites. RJ, I don't want all the land. I just want the land that's next to mine. If you carry that out, that's a lot of land. So wealth, and this is right now what's starting to hit our country and around the world as well, but no more so than here in America. It's starting to come, and it is going to be of epic proportions. We are going to have a tsunami. And again, these numbers vary, but anywhere from 59 to $66 trillion is expected by 2061, according to PNC Bank and other resources that I've double checked that number on. So that's a lot of money. Now, the question, of course, is, will that make our families happier? Will that make us happier? Well, here's the question. Will it make our holiday dinners? Will it be something that we really genuinely look forward to going to? Will it keep our families healthy, thriving, and growing for generations? Or will, I read this comment from someone who was in a dialogue in a chat box, and he said, I would give it all back if it meant that I was able to have my family back. This was a man who became enormously wealthy as a business owner, but basically just turned his back on the family because he was there 18 hours a day. So wealth is kind of interesting. In 2020, I reached out to Tom Rogerson. Tom is truly one of the foremost authorities on family wealth and the impact of wealth in families, good and bad. He's an expert in addressing the sometimes called affluenza. That's where there's so much money, so much wealth, that it truly makes the family sick from a psychological and emotional standpoint. So I wanted to talk more with him about the impact of this tsunami. And in the course of that, we decided, you know what, let's put together a presentation. In fact, now we're going to be presenting to, I won't call them one of the oldest groups because there are people that have been in that group that over 50 years, but it's one of the longest standing groups in Vistage, shall we say. And there's no pressure, but there's a couple of guys in there that have hospitals named after them. So if that gives you a feel for that. So I asked Tom if he'd be willing to do a webinar with us. And so thank you, Tom, for agreeing. And let me just give you a little bit quick bio about Tom for those of you who don't know him yet. So he and Kathy are recognized as some of the thought leaders in this whole space of what's called family governance. I know that's a fancy term. It just means that is the terms of the kind of the guidelines, the directions, the rules. What is it we agree to? They created something called the 7 Steps to Healthy Family Governance. And they assist in family communication, and you're going to understand why that's so important in a few minutes. But also being able to create the philanthropic vision, the legacy planning, and succession for the family wealth, but more importantly, for the family. And as Tom likes to say, we help prepare the money for the family, but just as important, we help prepare the family for the money. So Tom has more than 3 decades of experience in being able to give guidance and expertise and education to the families. And he also brings a tremendous family background that he's going to share with you a little bit as well. So Tom Rogerson, and has become a great friend, and you're going to really enjoy getting to hear him. Now, a little bit about me. I'm a little boy from Yakima, Washington, up in central Washington state. And I created something because my father died when I was 18. He had built a multi-million dollar business that sadly, 10 years after his death, was in bankruptcy. And we lost a significant amount of wealth, but just as significant was the wealth that we lost in relationships. Because people that had worked for Kelly Oil Company all of their life, some of them, suddenly were without work. And it was devastating to us as a family because there was nothing we could do about it. And so I just made the commitment that I was not going to let that happen to another business family while I was on watch. So I created something, our group is called Wealth Legacy Group, and I created what I call a Wealth Legacy Assessment and also Critical Actions Roadmap, where we look at not only just the wealth and investments and the insurance and get clear and granular on retirement, but we also review all their wills and trusts. We've got an on-staff attorney. And so we really get into the weeds in our planning. That's what we get hired for. And so to create these comprehensive and integrated planning arrangements for clients. So it's about maximizing growth. We're an independent registered investment advisor firm, also mitigating risk and protecting assets. We also are an insurance firm, but really getting clear, really granular on what family legacy looks like and the issues of philanthropy. My own personal goal is to facilitate $1 billion for philanthropy. We crossed 100 million in August of 2012. And if the Lord should tarry and I'm great along life, we'll get to that billion and just keep going. So a couple other things I'm known for is just the other day, got asked to be an expert witness in a situation where a gentleman is receiving $2 million from a deferred compensation payout. He was the president of a credit union. And so we're looking at some various tools for him that will throw off some significant tax deductions. So that's as well. What can we do if we're selling an appreciated asset like stocks, like real estate, like a business? And how can we sell that and either not pay tax at all, or at least defer the tax for up to 30 years? So doing an incredible amount of business in that, more and more all the time. I'm a certified exit planning advisor, so we also get involved in the exit and succession planning, not only for the wealth, but for the business. And for something that I've been aware of for years, but have not done anything about, but we're now doing a great deal about. Thank you, Valentina. Thank you, Vimian, 2 members on our team that are on the cutting edge of this. But there are banks out there that are willing to loan money to families of at least 5 million, better 10 million, but loan money at 2.5%. And we can take that money, put it into very specialized type of contracts that grow, protected against creditors. And when the income stream comes out, it's tax-free. And then we repay the bank and everybody's happy. So we're doing a great deal more of that. So there's some things that keep me off the streets at night. So let me talk about our goal for Tom and I for the next 2 days. First of all, we want to talk about the perspective and implications of this enormous financial tsunami that we're seeing. And then really lean into what's causing so many families to fail. And the number is staggering. It's absolutely staggering. So what can we do to keep the family intact and the wealth intact? And then on day 2, we'll do just a quick recaps for those that missed the first day. And then we're going to get into some specific recommendations about what can be done to keep the family and the wealth together for generations. So we're recording both days. It'll be approximately 60 minutes of speaking content. So for that reason, if you have to bail out, understand, but we are recording and you can use the chat feature, and I'll be trying to check on those chats while Tom is presenting especially. You're going to get a survey today and tomorrow. Today's survey, though, is to help us understand what's helpful to you and maybe some things you'd like us to be sure and bring out tomorrow during our time together, assuming you're able to be with us. So please give us your response. So let's get started. So again, our goals for today is understanding where we are in relationship to this incredible financial time and also for the relational time we have as families, the issues and implications of this financial tsunami I'm talking about, and why a staggering number of families don't make it even one generation. So the mom and dad are the guardrails on the bridge, but as soon as they're gone, that family's in trouble in many cases. Before I get into some content, I also want to recognize some folks that have been way out in front in this space for many, many, many years. And one of my mentors, and a mentor, I'm sure, of many that are on this call, Roy Williams, who we lost a couple years ago. But the Williams Group has been studying high net worth, high wealth families for decades. Both he and Vic Pricer have several outstanding books. So if you're in the wealth advisory, wealth management business, or if you're in estate planning, I highly recommend you get copies of these books, not only to read yourself, but also to give away to clients. Roy Williams' book For Love and Money is quintessential for anybody who's involved in the high net worth family space. And then Amy Costaro has taken the mantle of leadership in the Williams Group, and her book, along with Roy's, is also exceptional. You're going to hear us talk about Marv Blum. Marv is one of the top estate planning attorneys in the country, happens to be in Texas, the lovely sovereign state of Texas. And he and Tom Rogerson co-created this concept that we're going to be alluding to, and especially talking about more tomorrow, called the Fast Trust. I can never remember what that abbreviation stands for, so I just call it a legacy trust. But we're using it more and more with our clients. Jay Hughes, another outstanding attorney who decades ago was already dealing with this integration of family life and family wealth. So anything by Jay Hughes is worth listening to or reading. John Warnick, Purposeful Planning Institute, they've got their big annual conference coming up this summer in Colorado, not to be missed. And I want to do a special shout out to a dear friend, Bill Super, is a CPA who runs our North County Estate Planning Council here in San Diego. If you're not a part of North County, San Diego, you need to be, if you're serious about estate planning and advanced planning. Jay Link, I went for 2.5 years to a program that he created 3 days every quarter back in Indiana on family wealth counseling. And from that, grew an extraordinary organization called AIP, or Advisors in Philanthropy. These are people on the front edge. We're just setting up, thanks to Claudia's efforts, we're setting up a group here in San Diego. This is a group of folks you're going to want to be involved with. I really have enjoyed my being a part of AIP. And then another great friend, David York, outstanding attorney, along with his business partner, Andrew Howell. You'll want to get these 2 books, 44 Values That Change the World, Riveted. We use this with families. And then also a book for business owners as well as wealthy families called Entrusted. Again, hopefully that's helpful to get some shout outs, but get some things to be reading and listening to. Okay, well, back to it. Big number coming in. What are we doing about that? Let's try to put that number in perspective. $66 trillion. That's what I call a mega number. My eyes glaze over. I can't even understand what that is, but maybe this will help. This is the largest transfer of wealth ever in the history of capitalism. Ever. Maybe it helps to compare, how does this stack up against the US economy pre-COVID? So what would you guess the inflation-adjusted GDP of the United States is? Again, pre-COVID number, 20 trillion, a round number. That's a big number. And yet we're talking more than 3 times that much is coming in here in the next 40 years. And it might be helpful too to use this as a way to get a handle on what's $1 trillion or even $1 billion. I found this kind of cute. A million is 1,000 thousands, and that represents 11.5 days in seconds. And if you had 1 million ants, that would be a heck of a picnic, wouldn't it? 1 million ants, that would weigh about 6 pounds. That's a million. How about a billion? 1,000 millions, yep, that's 32 years in seconds, not 11.5 days, 32 years. And that's 3 tons worth of ants. Now, how about 1 trillion? That's 1 million millions, that's 1,000 billions, and that's 32,000 years in seconds. And 1 trillion ants would weigh over 3,000 tons. So when we talk about 1 trillion, now talk about 66 trillion. That's a whole lot of money. So what does the research say? that will happen to that wealth? Where is it likely to go? What are the odds? So they studied over 3,000 families. The average net worth was $20 million. Many of them actually were members of what's now called Vistage. At that time, it's called Tech. Now, 1,000 of those 3,200 roughly were what Roy called post-transition, meaning that the folks that made the money were dead. And they had then attempted to, or hoping to get the money to the next generation. So they wanted to study what happened to the family and the wealth of those 1,000 families. And what they found is that 70% of the families didn't survive even one generational transfer. And the same thing was for the businesses. The businesses were gone as well. It's the rags to riches to rags story. And this is not uncommon. This is not just an American phenomenon. You hear this shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves is an Australian expression. Clogs, 3 generations clogs to clogs is a Dutch expression. So this is something that does seem to be in our DNA and our wiring, but it's particularly grievous, especially when you realize there are ways that it doesn't have to happen, which is we've got Tom here to talk about. So is it possible to transfer wealth without it destroying the relationships and the well-being of an unprepared family? That was one of my first questions to Tom. And also, talk to me about family unity. Do we need to build family unity before we can start the actual estate planning process or the business succession process? And then how do we maintain that unity over generations? Is it important? Yes, duh. Does it matter? Absolutely. Those of you who have a family, can you imagine not having your family? So let's look again at some of that research and dig a little bit more if we can. So they studied over 1,000 families. The desire was on these, I mean, nobody got there saying, gee, I think we should just really screw up our families and have them not talk to each other ever again. But they were hoping that the strategies they'd put in place were going to work, that the family would survive and so would the wealth. But I'm here to tell you that hope is not a strategy. Hope is not a strategy. It's a great characteristic, but it's not a good strategy for planning. And so, as we said, not only were the wealth and the families both gone over 70%. So that is what we define as a train wreck. So with that, I'm going to stop my slides and give it back to Tom and have Tom start taking us through and getting us some answers, or at least the start of some answers. So Tom Rogerson, take it away, Tom.
Great. Thank you, RJ. It's great to be with you. And I've just to let you all know, RJ and I, we feel like we're kind of brothers from another mother. When we met, we just really clicked, and we share so much, not only in background and in what we do for families, but expertise and passion and values. So anyway, really great to be with you, RJ, and with all of you here today. As he had mentioned, Williams and Pressure's studies actually were some of the first studies that were done. They were a little bit more survey oriented than specific research. And so some people have criticized that maybe they're not exactly spot on, but directionally, there's nothing that has shown them to be off at all from a directional standpoint. Some of the scale of the numbers have altered a little bit. And so what you're seeing here is in our own work, and then some of the work that's been done by John A. Warnick and the Purposeful Planning Institute and other organizations and other people. Jim Grubman is a very well-known individual in this space as well, and Dennis Jaffe. But what my only point is, without knowing who some of these people are, but what they've found in additional research is that Williams and Pressure were directionally right, but numbers were slightly off. And so this is a little bit more accurate. This is also from the surveys my wife and I have done. We've had a chance to now work with and run family meetings for over 270 families that are getting into this family governance space. But in addition to that, we've interviewed over 200 families that have succeeded multi-generationally preserving wealth. And so from our own client experience and from those surveys, we combined that with Williams and Pressure and some of the more recent research. And what we're finding is about 50% of the time, trust around group. These are the reasons that families that have failed said they failed. 50% of the failure, they said, was due to lack of trust around group decision making. And which doesn't sound like, well, that can't be the reason. And it turns out this was almost universally the biggest cause for family. And we're going to get into why that is and what that could look like at a much more deep level in a minute. Conflict was deliberately being avoided. Um, and well, then why would you want to actively engage in conflict? Well, there are ways to practice and manage it. That's different than actively engaging in it. So 30% of the heirs were unprepared for the money they received, not being families don't want to talk about money. It's unseemly. We can talk about anything else nowadays, but still talk about money. We don't want to demotivate our children and create entitlement. So let's not talk about it as if that's not going to somehow, we'll raise them in a lifestyle, but we won't talk about the money. 15% of the failure, they said, was family members lacked the unity and a sense of purpose, of a place, feeling a sense of belonging to this family and feeling like I have a role in this family. And you're going to see wealthy families are more likely to give that impression to a child than a lower net worth family. So that's 90%, 95% of the problem of families that failed said it was because of these issues. None of these really are about the money and the plan. In fact, less than 5% of the failure was due to mistakes made in the planning by the planners, the estate planners, the investment advisors, the attorneys, and all. Well, great. Then the advisors must be doing a great job, right? Well, they are on the money piece, but if they're working with high net worth families that have 95% of the reason for their failure is being unaddressed by them and unaddressed by their advisors, that's an opportunity for the advisors and for the clients to think differently around this space. And what you're going to see is this, what my wife and I do is really, we'd call it legacy coaching or family legacy coaching. And what RJ does is this legacy advisory work. Ideally, those two come together, and we're going to hopefully build the case for that today and tomorrow. What would it look like for the advisors the client's working with and whoever the coach is, whoever's helping them think through legacy, what that really looks like? How do those mesh? How do we make sure the money is used to enable the family to succeed instead of actually encouraging the family to fail, which is usually the case? So that's a little bit about Williams and Pressure's work and what we found. My wife and I have a motto for this, that a strong business cannot hold a family together, but a strong family can hold a business together. People often think that, oh, they lost the business and so that's why the family fell apart. Or the trust, you could put another word in here instead. If you don't own a family business, you could say a strong trust cannot hold a family together, but a strong family can hold a trust together. Or you could talk about a family office. A strong family office cannot hold a family together. It all means the same thing. We tend to think that if we have the right structure, the right strategy, that will solve the problem of the family. And it's almost the opposite. Families that are succeeding multi-generationally have a governance, a decision-making process where is more inclusive typically. And we're going to give examples what this look like and how hopefully you can either implement this in your own family or you can implement with your clients. Now, I love what I do because although I'm going to be talking about families as if you have to have a lot of money before this can benefit you, my wife and I love what we do because our family's benefiting from the exact same thing we're teaching these clients. These clients may have a lot of money, but if wealth is money, then they benefit. If wealth is human capital, people, the relationships we have within our family, then we benefit. And if building a stronger family is healthy for wealthy people, why wouldn't it be healthy for less wealthy people? And I think what you're going to see is this is beneficial to anybody, but it's critical for families of wealth and what that could look like. The underlying problem was originally a money-related focus. And the money-related focus was that first generations build the wealth, that shirt sleeve to shirt sleeve phenomenon that RJ was talking about. Second generations get used to it. Third generations enjoy the heck out of it. Fourth generation lament the fact that it's now gone. My own family is right about where that red dot is. My great grandfather was a very wealthy man. He became the president of Boston Safe Deposit and Trust Company, grew it to be the largest financial institution in the Northeast by any measure. And he started a foundation in Boston that right now has a little bit more than $1 billion in it. So even by today's standards, he was doing pretty well. His estate plan was designed to get the bulk of the money down to the family. I'm his great grandson, and it's gone, I'm sorry to say, or I wouldn't be here. But it's not gone because of bad estate tax planning. He had brilliant estate plan. It's not gone because of stupid people in the next generation. It's gone because of how the family, we were not prepared. They had prepared the money for the family. They had not prepared the family for the money. And I'm going to talk about what that looks like. We had a wonderful, loving family, but there was no understanding of how to use the resources to bless the family as opposed to bless the individual, and what that could look like, and how that can affect a plan. So as RJ showed you earlier, the Williams and Pressures work, this is just a different iteration of the same research, that 50% of failure was due to lack of communication, 30% no clarity of family purpose or individual purpose, 15% of unprepared heirs. And so that's all culture. These are all culture related issues. And my point is, if they're culture related issues, why aren't we focusing on culture? And there's some great quotes about that. Peter Drucker had one about that strategy or culture eats strategy for breakfast. And yet we keep going back thinking if we have the right strategy and the plan, we're going to solve the culture problem in the family. And again, it's proving to be exactly the opposite. So let's build that case a little bit. First of all, the definition of fail. We right away think the definition of fail is losing the money. Actually, that's not the biggest concern to most parents. And the actual definition of fail often goes in an opposite direction. The first biggest, worst definition of fail is losing the history of the family. Who were we? Who are we? Who do we want to be? There isn't a sense of what our history is. Should I be learning my family history on ancestry.com, or should my father be telling me about my great-grandfather? Well, he can't, because he doesn't know about him. And I'm amazed at how quickly families fall apart, not only from a history standpoint, but the second part, from knowing each other individually. Because wealth allows more separation, family members often have a wonderful but more social relationship with their siblings. It's more like a cocktail party. How you doing? How's it going? Yeah, how's your golf game? It's not as consequential. And what would it look like to replicate that? Another example of not knowing each other, I often hold up my cell phone when I'm doing presentations, and I'll say, how many of you in the audience, however many you are, how many of you have all of your first cousins from both sides of your family and in your contact list? And if you call them right now, they would recognize you by voice. And I'm talking about first cousins here. You wouldn't believe how many people don't raise their hands. When I go to second cousins, almost nobody raises their hands. Third cousins, even rarer. I was doing a conference one time, and a guy came up to me afterwards. This is for a group of family offices. And a guy came up and said, what you're doing is really important to our family. We're spending time, money, and effort on this every year. I mean, it's a budget item in our line item. And he said, because we have these family meetings, I've gotten to know my cousins and my family so well. He said, as an example, I'm starting a business with a couple of my fourth cousins. I remember when he said that, I thought, what the heck is a fourth cousin? How far back do you have to go before you come forward to know what a fourth cousin is? And here he's starting a business. And he said, because of how we use some of the resources to encourage the knowing each other, to know and to be known is really foundational in human existence. But because we know each other, when we have a business idea, we're more likely to connect with the people we know to maybe launch it. And here they are blessing each other. I got to tell you, most of my second cousins, I don't know what they do for a living right now, because we just fall apart as families. These are of more concern to parents, uber wealthy parents, than did I get the estate plan right? And then the third loss or the failure of the family was losing the money. But it's because they lose the first two that group of people, who probably shouldn't be called a family anymore, can't do the third. They're almost unrelated. A way of looking at this that we thought was quite simplistic, but at the same time really explains a lot, was imagine a graph where the level of wealth goes up as we go over here to the right. And then as we go up on the left-hand axis, that there's a human dependence scale, but kind of reversed order, where dependent people are at the top, then independent, that's a better state, and then interdependent, that's even a better state of human existence and understanding, working together and all that. And there was sort of a fat tail bell curve that went across this when it came to levels of wealth. Low net worth families in that lower left-hand corner had tremendous interdependence. And a lot of it was because they were sharing assets, by necessity. They had it to. They had to do that. Oops, I went a little bit too. No, yeah, yeah, that's where I wanted to be. They're sharing assets by necessity, and they didn't know as much about each other. Let me paint the picture of what this could look like. Dinner table conversations in a house like that are very consequential. When Johnny says, "Can I borrow the car on Friday night?" everyone gets involved because it's the car. When Jill says, "Going to go to college?" everyone gets involved because if she goes to college, everyone's life's going to change to some degree. And what's interesting is, these children often shared bedrooms and maybe shared a bathroom. And they had unbelievable numbers of opportunities to rub elbows with each other. They didn't like it because they had to figure out how to negotiate. They were learning how to make group decisions together. Now, remember the number one reason that Williams and Pressure and that we found families that were falling, that had lost their wealth, were saying the biggest reason for it was lack of trust around group decision making. They didn't know how to make consequential decisions together because they never had any experience of doing it. Low net worth families had the experience of doing this all the time. I know what time to talk to mom. I know what time to talk to dad. I know what their moods look like. I know, because they had to. These children often went to public school. They came home at the end of the day. They had to rub up again. They had to do chores. They often had summer jobs and lived at home. They knew each other. Now, when I learned about some of this made sense to me because my father's family comes from a very wealthy family in America. My mother's family comes from a very poor Cuban family, one of 8 children in southern Cuba with almost nothing. She would tell stories of growing up, in one Christmas, the parents, my grandparents, gave them a coloring book for the 8 of them to share with a couple of crayons. I mean, they just had very little. And at one Christmas, they got a used beat up bicycle for all 8 of them to share. But the interdependence it built, I mean, that plus getting out of a communist country together, but the interdependence it built lasted until the day my mother died. If she had a problem, it was hard for me to get there in time to help her because my uncles and aunts were there before I did. My father's family came from American wealth, and what they were using the wealth to do was allow themselves to separate from the anxiety of having to make all these decisions with us, and they could use the wealth to separate. And so, interestingly as well, a 14-year-old in a family at the lower end of the scale usually knew how to buy a car by the time they were 14 years old. Now, why would a 14-year-old know how to buy a car in a lower net worth family? Because they probably saw the whole thing happen right in front of them. They were probably strapped in the back seat for the test drive. They heard the parents trying to figure out how to afford it at the table. Should we buy used or lease or whatever? Interestingly, though, if somebody in that family succeeds financially, they want to get away from this pain in the neck. And they want to raise their children in that middle dot. The middle dot is, oh, that's the American dream. It's independence. Oh my goodness, isn't this great? But what we find there is, just to paint the picture, dinner table conversations are less consequential. They're more social. How's your golf game? How's your tennis game? How was your day today? What vacation you want to go on? It wasn't consequential. It was much more social. And interestingly as well, these children, not always, but often have their own bedroom. Sometimes they have their own bathroom in suite. Oftentimes, not always, but sometimes they go to private school. And in summer, they don't go to summer job, they go to summer camp. Lots and lots of opportunities to actually know less about the people that I call family because I just don't spend time with them. And yet these are the very same people that are likely to inherit a business and try and figure out how to run it when their parents are gone, with no experience of learning how to do that along the way. And what was interesting too, by the way, a 14-year-old in a wealthy family is very unlikely to know how to buy a car, because the more expensive the car is that the parents want to buy, the less likely they are to talk about it in front of the child. Because who wants to talk about a $250,000 Range Rover in front of a 14-year-old at the dinner table? And so what was interesting is the 14-year-olds in a wealthy family, not only were they not participating in a group decision about something like a car, they weren't even seeing how the parents made decisions about money behind closed doors. So they had less experience understanding money than a low net worth family member would have had. And yet they're the very same people, as I say, that are supposed to figure this out. And we're going to leave a trust for lots and lots of money. We're going to use those advisors to save 10% on their state taxes. And yet they're not ready to handle 10% of the money they get in the first place. And what's interesting is they overlaid the idea of happiness, family happiness, on wealth and tried to figure out what level of wealth is required for the maximum happiness in a family. And so they did it by an income standard. What would you guess would be the maximum family gross income for the happiest families in America when they did this study? When they first did the study, the number was about $80,000. It's gone up a little bit to about $100,000 now. That's gross family income. What? Are you kidding me? I mean, that's like nothing by comparison to many of the families that we work with. What they said in the studies, though, was that that level of wealth, the families often had what they needed, not what they wanted. They wanted so much more, but they had what they needed. But they had to know each other and learn how to work with each other. And we have so many families. I mean, we consider that lower left-hand corner to be an entrepreneurial incubator. Most entrepreneurs actually came from that lower left-hand area. David Green of Hobby Lobby fame, he actually tells stories. He's in the Forbes 400, in the top 100 of the Forbes 400. And he tells stories about picking cotton when he was a kid with his family to earn a little bit of money on Saturdays. This is an entrepreneurial incubator in that lower left-hand corner. And yet many family members don't have that and don't build that. These are culture issues. This is the culture you come home to and see every day. The middle zone that families raise their children in is an entrepreneurial kill zone. We tend to think that entrepreneurs are lone wolves. They just go out and just build things all by themselves and they just do it. That's not what happens. In fact, if you look at most of the successful entrepreneurs, they have a management team that's been with them a long time. They understand teaming. They build teams at work. They often don't build teams at home, though. In fact, they'll spend money and time and effort on building culture at work. They'll assume family just means that. I have an article I wrote on this called The Home Team Advantage. They'll build home team mentality at work. They won't build a home team at home because they don't build team at home. What does that look like? And why is that an entrepreneurial kill zone? And how do we rectify that? Because families that are succeeding multi-generationally have a different culture. And yet most families that build wealth just don't get it or don't do that. Parents want their children to stay in that kind of stay up there, stay independent, because that's the American dream, and just keep making even more money and stand on our shoulders and make even more. Well, that's intimidating, first of all, because look at how successful they are. I've got to be more successful than them. I mean, that's intimidating. But what's interesting is some children with that kind of motivation by their parents do actually thrive. Unfortunately, many children raised in a higher lifestyle can feel a sense of guilt or embarrassment by the lifestyle that they were raised in. We have a lot of parents that talk with their kids that say, hey, don't drop me off in front of school in the Lexus because I don't want people to think we have that much money or whatever, the Bentley or something. So, and what's interesting as well is children that are raised in that very independent phase don't feel a sense of connection with their family members. And connection is one of the top things to prevent loneliness and anxiety and stress. And being connected builds resilience. There's so many more studies on this now that COVID has caused so much more disconnection. But building connection with others builds resilience individually and as an organization of family members. So what's interesting is family members that are raised to be totally independent have a higher likelihood to either never leave the upper left-hand area with that more dependent phase, or have a tendency to go back to that phase, to get back to that upper left-hand quadrant of, and it's interesting, that's where you see higher levels of anxiety and depression. Before going into COVID, we in America, if you read articles going back before that, if you look up epidemics in America before COVID, yes, there was oxycodone and all that stuff going on. But the big ones they were talking about were things like loneliness and depression and anxiety and all these personal anxiety issues that were going on in America. That was in general. Wealthy families are 2 to 5 times more likely to have those problems present in their family than lower net worth families. So we already had an epidemic. It was double that to 5 times that in wealthy families, and then COVID made it even worse. Why aren't we helping families in this space? Well, my daughter works at a school called Ironwood School up in Maine that actually helps children. It's a wilderness therapy program dealing with children that often were raised in very nice lifestyles and are incapable of connecting and just feel lost, and within their own family and in society they feel lost. It's not always the case, but there's a higher prevalence of this, and it's totally reversible if we use some of the resources to actually reverse it, but they usually don't. And so wealth doesn't cause all these issues. Wealth allows these issues. Wealth allows us to separate more, and it's the separation that often causes the issues. Well, our whole point in what we're trying to do is how do we move families from that middle dot to the lower right? or at least get them a little bit lower to get back to a place of interdependence. And a major difference, though, is that on the left-hand side, if you're going to be interdependent, you're sharing assets and decision-making by necessity. If you're going to get back to the lower right-hand side, you're going to have to be sharing assets and decisions, but it's voluntary. You don't have to do it. You've got the wealth to go off and do whatever you want. So to do it voluntarily, you need awareness. And that's why there are people like legacy coaches that come in and educate family on the importance of this. But ideally, once they come up with what they think their purpose is as a family, with everybody feeling a sense of place and purpose within the family, then they need to link that together with people like RJ on how do we plan, then invest and plan so that the plan is supporting the family. And it's that linkage that RJ and I just found so compelling of why it makes sense to help as advisors. You know, a typical team of advisors would be the wealth manager, the attorney, and the accountant. Should there be a legacy advisor or a legacy coach on the team as well for a wealthy family? And because that person can actually make the job of the other advisors more beneficial to the family, maybe easier to accomplish if you really know the purpose of the family, but certainly more effective at achieving results. Well, even if you do a brilliant job in all this and you got the best kids known in America, then they get married. And it's not that their spouses come in and are evil in any way or bad or ignorant. They just come in, usually they come in from the left-hand side with less net worth, because just by statistics, the odds are they would. And it used to be that one major wealthy family would marry another one, and you'd see them announced in the New York Times, and it'd be like the merger and acquisition page. But nowadays it's different. You're not typically meeting your spouse at a debutante party. Usually I meet him at college. We fall in love. It's kismet, and boom. And all of a sudden we're introducing these two cultures that now can be from quite different levels. And even if they're at the same level, they're often very different cultures. And if the other family has a stronger culture, which is likely to be the case, by the way, lower net worth families have a stronger sense of culture than higher net worth families do, then they can feel like they're taking your child away to join their culture rather than you bringing them in to join your culture. What would it look like to onboard spouses? That's a whole conversation all unto itself. How does a wealthy family design a plan to onboard spouses without feeling like we're giving up the keys to the kingdom, or they're taking advantage of us? So it's this idea of, to get to that lower right hand area, it's a familyness culture. And you're going to see tomorrow, if we have a chance to get into it, it's a little bit of an entrepreneurial mindset. Entrepreneurship does not mean building businesses. I know people think it does, but if that's the case, if entrepreneurship is profit making, then how come there are things called social entrepreneurs? Because social entrepreneurs are using an entrepreneurial problem solving mentality to solve problems in society. A family entrepreneur, as a parent, is different as well. It's trying to use a problem solving mentality within the concept of the family. It's a different culture. Well, I call the middle dot the red dot because, caution, a lot of problem there. The lower left is orange for before you leave it, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. So slow down a little bit. And the green zone is that lower right-hand corner. But the whole point is, how do we prevent going up left or get out of the upper left and move down to get to an interdependent phase? The healthy zone is really in the middle. It's not independence, total independence. It's not total interdependence. It's something in between where, and interdependence doesn't mean I can't live without you. It means I recognize I am better with you, that you have different capabilities than I have, and I have different capabilities than you have. And we learn that by working together. And so through that, we recognize we are better together. The vision my wife and I have used on this, and it kind of links together again what RJ's doing and give you a vision, is we just picture these railroad tracks going off 100 miles into the distance. If you're standing on some tracks looking out in Utah 100 miles, these tracks seem to go out to a vanishing point on the horizon. I've got a water bottle here, excuse me. And yet they look like they come together, but they never come together. And to us, this vision is the right-hand rail is working on the money. That's really important. Got to protect that business, protect those trusts. The left-hand rail is equally important. building, intentionally working on the relationships, to know and to be known, to trust and to be trusted, to love and be loved. These are foundational things, human character, they're foundational things needed by everybody, but they build more resilient people in society and in the family, and they build better resilient organizations like families. But the middle, the cross ties that hold this all together, are these opportunities to not focus on the business and not just focus on the relationship, but use the relationship and some of the wealth to make decisions together. Remember, the biggest reason families fail is due to lack of trust around decision making. So how do we practice and manage conflict? Well, first of all, we have to practice and manage making decisions together. And so we give examples to families of ways that could happen. Um, and one of my favorite quotes from a family is, wealth without responsibility or authority is a formula for resentment and failed self-worth. Okay, great. How do you give responsibility and authority to a child or their spouse or a grandchild when they're not ready? Well, if we're talking about the money and the business, I get it. If we're talking about planning the next dinner out, why wouldn't we so what happens? We have pizza, they mess it up or whatever. It's letting them learn how to make some decisions and make mistakes is really powerful. My wife and I, we actually took this to heart, and we gave a budget to our children and let them plan one of our vacations. That we now do this frequently, but we did this years ago. They planned the whole thing, they bought the tickets, and then they invited us to go on the trip that they had planned. Well, they're not managing my retirement account, but them learning how to manage that prepared them. If they had to manage my retirement account tomorrow, they're much more able to do it because they have experience at working together. And they're learning by successes and by mistakes. And the way this often looks is there are three things going on, as I mentioned before. On the left side is that to know and to be known, intentionally building relationships, intentionally focusing on them, deep communication and trust. We actually have tools we take families through. I mean, our motto is we're intentionally introducing and reintroducing a family to themselves repeatedly. Sounds very redundant, but it is for a reason. You do it with your management team. Why wouldn't you do it with your family? And there's some real tools to help them implement building that. And then ideally the plan funds it over time, because this often ends when the parents end. But that's the purpose of the family. The middle is where the ties that connect us together are these opportunities to make decisions together, practicing making decisions, the biggest reason families fail. And this is where we can create the culture, work on the culture, but we can also work on some of these strategies. Family philanthropy is one of the top areas here. If the children want to engage in it, not if the parents force them to, which is usually how it's put together, by the way. It's usually put in the plan, like there's going to be a foundation, here's your role on the board. That's, by the way, not very helpful in many families. I can come back to that more later tomorrow if you'd like, but we have real statistics and study on that one, that family philanthropy can be one of the best things you do, and it can be one of the worst things you do. It's not the concept of philanthropy, it's how you do it as a family that makes the difference. And so these are a lot of things in that middle ground, though, are opportunities to learn how to work together. The right-hand side is working on the money, the stewardship of the money, where we're focusing on the business and the roles and all that. Now, that's the purpose of the wealth in the family. Most families that we work with have a lot of roles in the family for the money or the business. And they give a tremendous impression that if you want to be part of this family, these are the important people, and all of the rest of you are less than because you don't have a role in the business. Wait a minute. If we broaden this out and we have roles in the relationship building and in the vacation planning and the philanthropy, and we have roles in the business, there's a role for everybody. I was doing a family meeting one time, and one of the mothers said, I don't really have a role. I mean, they all have roles, but I don't really have a role. I mean, all I do is organize the holiday party, and I set up the Secret Santa, and I make sure we get the right venue. Oh, we have to make a big deal out of it. And I come up with a menu and assign it around. And I'm like, are you kidding me? That's one of the most important roles in this family. What's the succession plan for that role? And she kind of looked like a peacock, very proud of it. But they all got an aha moment of, yeah, we've been giving everybody the impression that money's more important than people. And that was not what the parents believed, but their focus was there. So it looked like they believed it. And that's what so many of these parents end up doing. So my wife and I created a 7-step process to healthy family governance. And it starts at the down low, because you got to build a foundation before you build a house. So we first take them through an assessment of where are they. And it's really interesting for them to know where they are when they see the group of results of that. Then in education process, we believe in this notion of awareness. You can't solve a problem you don't even know it exists. So awareness can create acceptance that some part of that makes sense, which can lead to action, which means awareness is the beginning. You've got to become aware of what the issues are as a family, so that, remember I said, if you're going to get to a place of interdependence in a wealthy family, it's got to be voluntary. That requires the awareness, that requires the education. So we take them through an education process. Then building trust around communication. How do we make decisions where I know where you're coming from? And so we take them through a leadership style assessment that's really cool. And then we take them through a values exercise. And there are a lot of these, but I mean, how do you go from just the words that I say are my values to my definition of that word, and then a story of why it's important to me? And they're really getting to know each other. Remember I said our motto is we want to introduce and reintroduce the family to themselves. So far, we're at step 4 in a 7-step process. We haven't talked about money yet. The next step is, again, not money related. It's conflict management. If we're going to start to try and do something, should we at least understand how we're going to get through any conflict? Is there a roadmap? You know, if I have a conflict with you, coming back for the 15th time, but this time I'm just going to speak louder, is not a good strategy. That typically doesn't change the outcome. Well, then if I'm going to do something different, what would make sense for me to try? And so that's really helpful for them to see. All this leads to actions we can take. And then this leads to, okay, we've now got a family that has built some sense of what we believe is important going forward. How do we link that with RJ in putting the family purpose with the plan? And we're going to get into that in detail tomorrow. Today, we don't have time to fully cover all 7 of these steps. Today, we're going to open up, at least introduce you to, is a little bit of the concept of conflict. How do you conflict manage? Tomorrow, we're going to actually show you a tool, a method to get into conflict management that I think you're going to find valuable. And then we're also going to jump up to number 7 and talk about how do you link the plan to the family purpose together, where people like RJ and we would work together on these things. When it comes to conflict, families that don't have conflict are avoiding it. There's just no family that doesn't have conflict. It's not a matter of who has it and who doesn't. It's who's avoiding it or not. RJ, comment or thought on that?
Well, I mean, the fact is, it's not something that we're doing wrong. I like to say we're all whacked. You know, there's just some days I'm more whacked than other days. You know, but we're all whacked. So how do we bring that brokenness together, but find ways it's unique, where we can be able to share and support and encourage each other, and celebrate the fact that we are different.
That's a great point. That's a great point. What we see, as well as what RJ sees, is that oftentimes families, when it comes to conflict, are over here avoiding conflict, and they avoid it and avoid it because, you know, if you don't have to get into it, I don't really want to tell you what I think because I don't want to get into a fight. So I'll avoid it. I got someplace else to go. Can't be there for dinner next week, whatever. And that goes on and on and on until they have an explosion, because now it's just so frustrating. I can't believe it. And we have to make a decision for some reason, whatever. And they jump all the way over to the other side, where they have, after this explosion, they need expensive mediation, or they have a fast split, big divorce. And it doesn't have to be a marriage. It can be just, you know, a relationship between brother and sister. What they bypassed in going from one side to the other was this whole area of practicing and managing conflict, learning how to make decisions together. And that is this whole area that we're encouraging families to get into, of coming up with some of these tools where you can coach and you can, you know, consult, you can mentor basically next generation, but working together, giving them opportunities, intentional experience exercises that they can work on together. Family philanthropy fits in here. Family entrepreneurship. How do you create that environment and that culture as a family? Interdependence, the ties and that pull all this together. All those things that I showed you before are in relation to this. The roles in the family are not just in the relationships and the wealth, it's in all those decision makings along the way. So how do we then focus on culture is really key. What we're normally finding in wealthy families, and it's in a lot of families, wealthy families are particularly good though at raising children to stay children. They're not very good at raising adults. What typically happens in a wealthier family is a child will make a petition to a parent of something they'd like for some resource, whatever, and then the parent will respond, often with a resource, maybe at the level they wanted. And that's kind of the relationship, the communication. It's up and down this way, and it's back and forth. And this is treating children like children, and children get used to it, and then children want to be. That's the normal pattern. And then when the parents die, they often leave a trust in place with a trustee to replace the role. And this is treating children like children forever. I have a friend of mine here in Duxbury, where I live, Massachusetts, and he wanted to buy a boat, a fishing boat. He's got a trust that was set up by his grandfather for him that has about $10 million in it, a little bit more than that. And he wanted to buy a fishing boat, not too big, but a nice fishing boat, to take his grandson and his kids out and teach them how to fish and all that kind of stuff. And the trustee looked at it and thought about it and said, no. My friend is almost 70 years old. At what point do you get to actually act like an adult? Could there have been a different dialogue between that beneficiary and the trustee? Could the trust have been set up differently? And I'm not saying to entitle him and buy him Queen Mary, but could there have been a better dialogue, a healthier dialogue to empower that person? Wealth without responsibility or authority builds builds entitlement or failed self-worth. What was missing in this diagram I'm showing you is the next generation communicating with each other and learning a process. And if they did, and if they worked together, and then with team communication, they could have come to the parents as adults and made a proposal of, hey, we kind of like this. What do you guys think? Parents, when I mention this, that say, wow, is that possible? They love the idea. Instead of feeling like I'm having to negotiate these separate conversations with different people wanting different things, they are banding together, not to overwhelm me, but they're showing that they have shared ideas and visions and what they'd like to accomplish. And then it becomes a model for how this family can work with the trustees down the road. Again, there are models of what that could look like. So when the parents are gone, the trust replaces that role. Because when the parents are gone, it is this next generation that elevates up a level. And then it's a matter of, are they modeling behavior differently for the next generation? Are they working together? If they are, if they at least know each other's names, this is what the family that I mentioned before, where the individual said, we're fourth generation cousins, starting business together. Turns out that was the Rothschild family. And they have family meetings every year. And they are building this level of knowledge of each other. Infinite, no, but it's a start. It's better than most. If most people, if they walk by a fourth cousin, they wouldn't recognize them on the street. That's the same, by the way, for third cousins and for second cousins, usually. And yet we keep saying family means everything, but we don't prove it because we don't build it. So ideally, it's this idea of building this structure where generations can benefit from the trust if it's done right. Well, that gets to that whole notion of these cross ties that pull it all together. And that's what we advocate. That's what we encourage. I hope you see how then the family purpose needs to then mesh with the work that RJ is doing on creating a family structure to implement the purpose, but the purpose needs to be focused on before we put the structure in place. With that, I'll turn it back over to RJ.
Thanks, Tom. Okay, well, we are right up against the hour here. So if you do have, I've gotten a few questions that have come across. Not sure why my slides are not showing, but if you've got some questions you want to ask, feel free to send them over. We are recording this, so a couple of people that had another commitment that came in late. Yep, don't worry, we're recording it. So just to summarize, 60 to 70% of families will fail. In other words, they will no longer be speaking with each other by the end of the second generation. And 80 to 90% of families by the end of the third generation. So the cause of this family and wealth erosion isn't bad investment management. It's not about bad tax planning usually. It's because it's a lack of trust and communication around a group decision-making process. So I can tell you this, and I'm not trying to pick on any profession, but most modern estate plans simply do not address this critical component, the issue of trust or lack of trust and the communication within the family. So, excuse me, by having and integrating these concepts into the planning, we can in fact create that unity and celebration, as I talked about a moment ago. And it's not perfect, but it's going to greatly increase the probability of that family lasting for generations. And guess what? The wealth will oftentimes as well. So again, conclusion on this, another one is that family meetings, they're not optional. They need to happen. Now, they don't necessarily all need to be business meetings, but having a plan, for our family, we were meeting once a month over at Phil's barbecue oftentimes. But then, of course, COVID hit and couldn't do that anymore. So it's been very difficult for folks. But I do know some families that they get together via Zoom on Sundays or once a month somehow. But family meetings are a requirement. And this lifelong learning about each other, not from a book, but from just who are we as people? And people change, obviously. I'm not the same person my wife married. I'm not the same husband. My wife is not the same person that I married. But that's exciting. That's where we get a chance to continue to grow and learn with each other. And at that meeting, we want to focus on being able to build trust, preserve, and deepen relationships, choose interdependence, not independence, and not dependence, and practice this whole thing about, okay, how do we make decisions as a group? Last of all, these shared experiences, these activities, the traditions that come from this, it creates a purpose for everyone in the family. I love that story that Tom shared about the moms going, hey, I just organized all this stuff, the Secret Santa, big deal, not realizing how important that was from a tradition standpoint. So that's where we create belonging. That's where we reinforce a commitment to one another and fortify the relationships we have with each other and create resilience. People who have relationships have resilience. Those that don't, it's like if you ever need a parachute and you don't have a parachute, never going to need a parachute again. We need for that resilience. So we're going to talk tomorrow about funding a FAST. It's a special kind of a trust. Again, I call it a legacy trust. Family culture is hard to change. It is slow to change, especially from the inside out. That's where you need to have an experienced professional like Tom, or like our friend Andy Ward back there in Atlanta. You need professionals that you do not try this at home to get it started, keep it going, be able to be good listeners. We're going to talk more about how to, again, address conflict, getting into that tomorrow. So the opposite of control is participation. The opposite of control is participation. So got some gifts for you in case you can't come and join tomorrow. There's no cost for this. If you just take your cell phone out and text to 22828 and just text in the body WLG, that will start a dialogue. We'll get an email and we'll send you quote actions if you want. So this is what it looks like. It comes out either daily or twice a week or once a week. And this happened to be a quote from John Wooden. You cannot live a perfect day without doing something for someone else who will never be able to repay you. Your action is today to make an anonymous gift for someone or do something nice for someone without them finding out that you did it. So every day we send these out. We literally send out hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. It's absolutely free. I hear from an increasing number of people that this is the very first email that they open in the day. So if you'd like for that, just go ahead and send a text to 22828. Nobody will follow up with you. There'll be no phone calls. And do watch, if you do sign up for it, do watch for the response email because invariably it goes in a junk email. Yes, it just does. We have an absolutely free retirement video series that's on our website, wealthlegacygroup.com. So if you go to our video section, boom, it's the first one down. We got tons of other videos in there too. We've recorded over the years, things like other great speakers like Tom. But our retirement series, 12-part, it's absolutely free, and it addresses the 10 biggest mistakes that people make that will cause them to fail in their retirement. And then, of course, if you've got a question about your trust, you want to talk about your investments, your insurance, your planning, your family situation, we do offer a 20-minute complimentary call. So just reach out to us, email us, whatever you want to do. So as a recap of today, we looked at the perspective and implications of where we are financially speaking with this huge tsunami. We talked about the common causes of failure in the family and in the business and keeping wealth in the family intact. Tomorrow, we're going to do just a real quick flyby, again, of some of those issues and some of the observations that come, but mainly we're going to be leaning into specific recommendations for how to preserve the family. I'll be talking about some specific tax strategies and things that we use. But again, it's about how do we keep this family and the wealth together for generations. For those of you who do have some questions, great, love to take them. If you need to take off, been great having you with us, been our great honor. So if those that want to open up the mic and ask a question, you can do that. Or Tom, can you see on the chat box, do we have, let's see.
Oh, sorry, I should be looking at that. I don't. I'll figure it out.
Okay, not
Chat
to worry.
box. I know it's somewhere here. Huh.
So I know we're over time. So if
I don't see anything in the chat box. If you have a question, just unmute yourself, please, and go ahead and ask.
Bless you.
Excuse me.
Don't be shy now. Jim Hitson's always got questions. Come on, Jim. How does this apply to you and for the teams and the folks that you work with? Okay. Well, 3, 2, 1. All right, everybody. I'm delighted that you have been with us. Thanks so much for joining us. And again, special thanks to Tom Rogerson. As you can tell, this is why he is so much in demand. He and Kathy, his wife, there was a recent webinar that was put on for 3 weeks in a row. And I understand it was highly, highly attended. I was there as well, but I mean, they had hundreds of people. It was the Rady's Professional Symposium, and Tom and Kathy got into talking about some of these really thorny kind of issues. And you understand why after hearing Tom today. So tomorrow we'll be back the same bat station, 12 o'clock tomorrow, 12 to 1. So thanks so much for being with us. God bless. Look forward to having you back with us. Bye for now.
Thank you all. Thanks, RJ.
Thank you, Tom.
Godspeed, everyone.